Every single year, thousands of pre-medical students across the country gear up to prepare for their medical school interviews. While it would be impossible to prepare for every single question that you might get asked during your interview tour, there are 5 common questions that you're almost guaranteed to hear at some point during your interviews. What separates mediocre answers from those that will leave a lasting, positive impression on admissions committees? How can I prepare my answers in such a way that will leave me feeling prepared without sounding rehearsed? And finally, what can I do to increase my chances of being in the elusive top 10% of applicants that ultimately secures an admission to medical school? Hey everyone, if you're new here, my name is Darren and I'm a resident doctor based right here in Canada. So in today's video, we're going to get into 5 of the most common questions that you're likely to encounter at some point during your Canadian medical school interview tour. For each section, we'll go over some do's and don'ts that are meant to serve as guidelines when you're crafting your own personal responses. Of course, these guidelines are based on my own personal experience interviewing at 3 medical schools in my year, 8 residency programs in my residency match year, and of course, the years of experience that I have helping students get into medical school through my work with Canadian Pre-Med. Finally, at the end of each section, we'll go over a model response that I've prepared based on my experiences, which will hopefully serve as inspiration for you when you are all preparing your own personal responses to these questions. If you're interested in practice interviews with either myself or one of our Canadian Pre-Med consultants, head on over to canadianpremed.ca. We would love to get in touch with you and help you put your best foot forward during your very special day. Now, before we get into the do's and don'ts of this question, I think it's useful to take a step back and understand the context for why the interviewers might be asking you this question, as well as some common themes that often come up when students are formulating their responses to this question in particular. In my mind, the purpose of this question is really just to see that you've thoroughly considered all the potential pros and cons of a career in medicine. It's really just to weed out those that haven't really given it much thought and maybe applied on a whim and aren't really ready for the sacrifice and hard work that it's going to take to get through medical school residency and to continue on in a career of lifelong learning as a one-day independently practicing attending physician. I think sometimes where students get really stressed out is they fall into this trap of thinking that their response has to be completely original, no one else could have ever said it before, it has to be 100% unique. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. We're all drawn to the field for very similar reasons. We probably all have an interest in science and the human body and helping people. So that being said, we are going to go over some common themes that often come up. But I just want to lay the groundwork that whatever answer you bring to the table doesn't necessarily have to be unique and, no one's ever said it before, but it should be genuine and authentic to you. Some common themes that often arise during students' responses to this question include personal encounters with the healthcare system, either through their own experiences or the experiences of their loved family members. Students often cite the fact that they have interests in science and the human body, as well as a desire to think critically and engage in interpersonal interactions, and the fact that they find those types of interactions meaningful. Additionally, students can oftentimes talk about the fact that they've progressed their understanding of the career and the field of medicine by talking to medical students, residents, physicians, and other allied health professionals. And finally, good answers typically involve some acknowledgement of the sacrifices that one will have to make. But despite those sacrifices, the willingness to continue on in their pursuit of the career of medicine because of whatever intrinsic motivating factors they have drawing them to this field. Now, if you're sitting there listening and you're thinking, oh my goodness, like my answer to this question literally touches on one, if not all of those themes, don't be afraid. These are just some of the most common things that students bring up, which doesn't necessarily make the answer good or bad, favorable or unfavorable. It just means that these are some common themes that tend to come up. Again, I want to get away from this idea that your answer has to be incredibly unique and no one else can possibly replicate it, because we're all drawn to this field for similar reasons. What's really going to make your answer stand out is the personal examples that you offer, as well as your genuineness and authenticity and personality when delivering the answer itself. So with all that being said, let's get into some do's and don'ts when crafting your response to this question. Do focus on intrinsic motivators. So what is it about the career or the profession that draws you to it because of the work itself? Try not to focus on extrinsic motivators, so things like money, prestige, respect, or even family expectations. And it's not to say that some of these factors can't actually inform your decision to pursue the career of medicine, but it shouldn't be the first thing you talk about in an interview, because really you're wanting to put your best foot forward. You're kind of wanting to tell the interviewers that you're actually going to like the job of being a doctor, and you're going to be willing to put up with the sacrifices that are required to get through medical school and residency because you have a desire to do the job in and of itself. When I was in grade 12, I actually explored a number of different career paths, everything from business to computer science to engineering. And ultimately, I think I landed on medicine because I really wanted a career that was going to challenge me interpersonally, emotionally, and intellectually, not just in any one of those three domains, but really all three of those domains together. And I think, I had the opportunity in undergrad to explore that interest through conversations with medical students, residents, as well as sort of my own personal research. And that really reaffirmed my desire to pursue the practice of medicine and the study of medicine, because I understand that it's a field of lifelong learning that is going to challenge me in all those different areas to a degree that I don't think can easily be replicated in any other profession. I know that there are going to be lots of sacrifices I will have to make. There's going to be long hours. It's going to be stressful. And I'll be called upon to help patients cope through periods of stress where I will be the one actually delivering really bad news. But I think that there's immense gratification that comes from being able to help serve these patients and really master the skills that are necessary to become a great physician. And I think that despite the sacrifices, I'm really willing to put myself through medical school and through residency because of the immense gratification that I know it would bring to overcome some of these challenges and ultimately serve the Canadian population. Now, typically, it's not this question that students tend to get tripped up on. Usually, it's the other question, the what is your greatest weakness, that is a little bit more of a wrench in our plans. But that being said, I think there are still some noteworthy points that are worth keeping in mind when crafting your answer to this response. Do get straight to the point. My greatest strength is blank. You don't really want to kind of spend time thinking about, like I could sort of pick from these different strengths, or maybe I'm a good leader, but I'm also a good communicator, but I'm also a good collaborator. So that's kind of not how you want to answer this question. You kind of want to get straight to the point, because A, that's going to maybe potentially come across as arrogant, and B, you should have already really prepared for a question like this, just given how common it is. So do get to the point. And once you say whatever it is your strength is, you'll want to expand on that and provide examples. So it's one thing to say, I'm a good communicator, but how have you demonstrated that through your extracurriculars, your employment experiences, your volunteering experiences? Ideally, the strength that you choose to touch on should be relevant to the field of medicine. I think that goes without saying. So in the Canadian context, that would be a reference to the CanMEDS rules, but don't force it. So you don't necessarily need to use the exact term or buzzword that is in that CanMEDS flower. You just need to be able to communicate that you have the skills that are transferable to being a doctor. A lot of these skills that'll often come up are soft skills, such as communication, collaboration, leadership, teamwork, etc., etc., etc. But they can also, in some cases, be more technical or harder skills if you want to take a research or critical thinking approach to this question. Finally, I think this goes without saying, but you don't want to really talk about a skill that's completely irrelevant to the field of medicine. So yes, you may know R, you may be a good coder, you may have a number of different technical skills, but that's probably not what they're looking for in this case. The R situation may be tangentially related if you're going into research, but primarily what skills are going to help you in a clinical environment during patient encounters, helping you to make medical decisions with vast amounts of complex informations. These are the skills that you probably want to highlight in this response. One of my greatest strengths, I think, is teaching, and this really first became evident to me when I was in school, and there may have been classmates that were struggling to understand concepts, so they would sometimes turn to me for help, and I just remember how immensely gratifying it was to be able to help them understand a concept that they were previously struggling with. However, as I got more experience in explaining and teaching and even doing presentations throughout my education, it became clear to me that I really had to pay attention to those nonverbal cues, because sometimes people would say they understood, or maybe they even thought they really did understand a concept. But when I checked for understanding by asking a follow-up question, it was clear that they had an incomplete or sometimes incorrect understanding of the concept that the teacher was trying to teach. And so I think that really made me sensitive to the nonverbal cues that people can sometimes give off when you're in conversation with them. But I also furthered that love for teaching through my involvement in volleyball coaching. As a player, I wanted to take that love for the game and combine it with my love for teaching, and I think that made me even more sensitive in how I deliver instruction and feedback and how I teach players, because these are young kids trying to develop an understanding of how to perform sometimes complex compound movements, and oftentimes the feedback needs to be delivered constructively, but also with some sensitivity, because you don't know how kids are going to take coaching all the time. They may be more or less receptive to the feedback that we have to provide them. So all in all, I do think that teaching for me is personally one of my greatest joys, as well as one of my greatest strengths. And hopefully, should I have the privilege of studying and one day practicing medicine, I would love to incorporate teaching into my practice, both through my patient interactions, as well as potentially also teaching medical students as well. Out of all the questions that you're likely to get asked on your medical school interviews, students tend to struggle with this one the most. But although it may seem difficult at first, I'll let you guys in on a little secret. Once you know how to answer, it's actually not that bad. In terms of do's and don'ts, don't talk about a strength that is masquerading as a weakness. So for example, don't say things like I'm a perfectionist, or I care too much, or I work too hard. These qualities may all be true about yourself, but they can come across as ingenuine or insincere, or trying to turn a strength into a weakness. On the other hand, do actually discuss a genuine weakness that is somewhat related to the field of medicine and the steps that you've taken to overcome and or compensate for that weakness, as well as the steps that you're going to continue to take to ensure that this weakness doesn't become a hindrance to your career in the study or practice of medicine. Don't talk about a weakness that is essential to the role of being a doctor unless you've worked very, very hard to overcome that weakness and can convey that to the admissions committees, in which case I would wonder, is that even a weakness at all anymore? But in any case, don't say things like I am a poor communicator. Don't say things like I don't get along well with others, and don't mention that you
can't focus for very long periods of time, because that'll raise questions about your ability to be a doctor and study medicine. On the other hand, do talk about a weakness that is related to your work of being a doctor, but not necessarily central to your role. The example that's often given is public speaking. However, because this is becoming more common practice, it can also come across as slightly disingenuous if everyone uses the example of public speaking. So try to think and reflect and think about, what weakness do I actually have that may be either directly or indirectly related to the study or practice of medicine, and how can I talk about how I've taken steps to improve on that weakness, compensate for that weakness, and what steps am I going to take in the future to continue to build upon those skills. Don't discuss negative personality traits, so don't say things like I'm too lazy, I'm too prideful, I'm too selfish. These negative personality traits are more likely to be perceived as fixed and unchangeable, which is certainly not the message that you want to send your interviewers. Instead, do talk about skills that you are genuinely lacking in, but can be improved upon, as well as the fact that you've taken efforts to improve upon them already. That would be the most ideal situation. So, for example, you may not be the best writer, but you decided to take an English course to help with your writing skills by getting formal education and feedback in that domain. You may not be the best public speaker, but you chose to join the Toastmasters Club and would like to continue on giving presentations throughout medical school and residency for various different academic groups to continue to build upon that skill. Or potentially you may choose to reference the fact that you're not the greatest at interpreting scientific literature, because sometimes the methods that they use can be a bit complicated or unfamiliar for you, and so you've chosen to read more primary scientific literature, to attend journal clubs, and to immerse yourself in environments that are going to help foster and build those skills for you to be able to use in your clinical practice one day. Something that I struggled with throughout my educational career and even early university is delegation. And I think I struggled with that throughout school because I have always cared very much so about the mark that I get at the end of the course. And although not everybody in my group projects always shared that same sentiment, I still wanted to be able to put my best foot forward and to be able to get as high of a mark as I possibly could in the groups that I was a part of. And unfortunately, this did lead me to not only take on more than my fair share of work, but it deprived me of the opportunity to enhance or lean on the strengths of my group members to create a result that would have been better than the result that was achieved through my own individual efforts in the group environment. That being said, I think something that really helped me realize this skill deficit and help me work on it was my involvement in sports. So throughout high school and university, I was involved in various competitive and intramural soccer and volleyball teams. And in these sports, it's really rare that one individual can completely dominate the show. These are team sports after all. And so these sports taught me how to identify and enhance the strengths of my team members by noticing what situations or skills they had that would be beneficial for the overall functioning of the team. I think that being able to take that learning and apply it in other settings such as work or school has been immensely helpful for me. And although I'm still working on it in those other types of environments, I do think that sports once again has contributed to my ability to both identify this skill deficit and the willingness to work on and continue to improve it. For this question, I don't know if it's totally fruitful to give a mock answer, because really the answer to this question is going to vary so much between individuals and vary so much between different schools based on a number of different factors. But in general, the ideas that you want to touch on are why specifically this medical program in particular. So what is it about the curriculum or the academic opportunities that draws you to the school? What is it about the city that you like? You know, do your research in terms of if you're applying to Toronto, what is it about Toronto that you like? Because you're going to be living there for 4 years, so you should have some kind of idea of what living in Toronto would be like. Why the patient population? For example, if you have experiences volunteering at a homeless shelter during your undergrad or high school years, it would make sense that you have some sort of passion or aptitude to working with that population in a clinical setting as well. And so you may choose to highlight the fact that you want to come to a big city with a homeless population because you have a passion for working with those particular individuals and helping support them in their health and well-being. And finally, you can choose to touch on any personal factors such as proximity to friends or family, but really it's the aforementioned 3 points that you want to hit on first before getting into any sort of personal factors like the community or friends and family that you have nearby. This is definitely a question that will require specific research for each school that you're interviewing at. So go on the program's website, go on all their social media channels, and just see what types of ideas, posts, missions, and values are they promoting, because you do kind of want to give off the sense that you are in line as a person with the mission and values of the program that you're applying to. I remember when I was preparing for this medical school interview question, I actually thought it was a little bit silly that I had to prepare for this, because really the only question I had is, are you going to take me or not? Because I'd be happy to go to any medical school in Canada, let alone one in my own province. That would be literally a dream come true. Now, that being said, obviously that's not really the mindset you want to go in with. You don't want to give off a sense of desperation when you're ending your interview, or really at any point in your interview at all. And as much as possible, even if you only have one interview, you kind of want to go in with the mindset that you're choosing between schools and you want to send the interviewer a signal that you want to get a sense of what the school has to offer you as a future student, because medical schools want the best students to be a part of their class, and they know that the best students are going to have multiple offers from multiple different schools. So if the questions you ask suggest that you are in some way qualifying them or putting gentle pressure on them to sell themselves to you, then that's only going to make you stand out more, assuming the rest of your interview, of course, went really, really well. In terms of do's and don'ts, do your research. So look at the school's website, and like I said in the previous question, look at their social media and just get a sense of what the values are, what the culture is like, any questions that are easily answerable through a quick browse of their website and their online presence, because you really don't want to ask anything that is too superficial in terms of question. That's going to show that you're not that serious of a candidate, that you're not doing your own homework when it comes to being prepared for the interview process, and you don't really want to discuss any controversial or heated topics like politics or religion or anything like that. That's really not the time and place for that type of a question, although there is time and place for those discussions. The end of your interview is certainly not when you want to bring those topics up. Some of the questions that might come up if you're starting to approach this question from a mindset of an individual that's choosing between different medical school offers as opposed to somebody that's just desperate to get in anywhere, essentially, is, what do you think is the best and worst part about this medical school? How would you describe the culture of the school? What is the school doing to support student success and well-being throughout their medical education? And have there been any recent changes to the medical school's curriculum that have been based on student feedback in recent years? Once again, these types of questions add a little bit of gentle pressure to the admissions committees to be able to start selling their program to you. And once again, that's going to sub-communicate to them that you're not really sold on their program and you kind of need to do a little bit more research before deciding which medical school you'd like to attend.
If you're interested in learning about how I personally prepared for my medical school interviews, I'll leave a link to those videos in one of the top hand corners at the end screen of this video. And of course, if you're interested in practice interviews with either myself or one of our Canadian pre-med consultants, do head on over to canadianpremed.ca. We would love to be able to work with you this cycle. Thank you so much for watching the video, everybody. I hope you found this helpful, and best of luck this admission cycle.